today to this talk by Vy Trịnh. Thank you also for helping me sit in the front rows. So in this talk, we will talk... Okay, let's start again. That's the school bell. In this talk, we will approach this exhibition, White Noise, through the perspective of a sculptor. And she will extract the formal and conceptual elements from the works and think about those elements in the sculptures in relation to conceptual sculptural practice through a method that she calls sampling, which is, you'll see her explain, is related to music and hip hop specifically. I'll introduce Vy as well. Vy holds an MFA from the University of Pennsylvania and a BFA from Parsons School of Design. She's also exhibited very widely, but I had to check where. She's exhibited in group exhibitions in Worthless Studio in Brooklyn, Atelier in Philadelphia, Automat in Philadelphia as well, White Columns in New York, and Gallery MC in New York. And she's here today with us from monumental, which is just in another district.
Thanks, Han, for the introduction. Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today. My name is Vy Trịnh. I'm a sculptor. First of all, I would like to thank Vy Trịnh, who's not here today. She's the curator of the show, White Noise. Thanks, Vy, for inviting me to do a response to a very well-curated and thoughtful show. I hope you all had a chance to see the show, and if you haven't, please don't spend some time after the talk or come back later to check out the show. The show is on until January, I think. Also, I would like to thank Bill for giving me this opportunity and all the staff members at Wayne Art Foundation for facilitating this event and making this happen. Okay, so the way I started thinking about this talk is that I wrote a blurb in response to Vong's curatorial choice of the show, and actually I start with the light moving of the scanner moving across the ceiling, and the sound of the scanner moving across the room. So I would like to read that I wrote. When it gets darker, your vision becomes blurred. You may never fully see. Sweeping light casting shadows to divide space. Figures are embedded up close and afar, and the clock ticks back and forth. Noise echoing from afar, but heavy breathings reverberating between skins. You might only grasp it in blurs and darkness. Each orientation disorients the others because no one experienced fire the same way. Shadow imprint on the ground, then they disappear throughout the intervals of light and darkness. A slight shift creates multiples, but sometimes multiplies to a total blackout. When one material is asked to act like the others, no one knows what it is anymore. Time allows matters to condense, but also to rip apart. As Han introduced earlier, the way I approach this talk as a sculptor, I look at different sculptures that are selected for the show, and then I'll pull out some themes or formal elements. Then I will divide them into 3 groups, and I will pick out examples that I think are relevant in the contemporary sculpture now. To me, I think that as a sculpture is a practice that devotes to breadth and inclusivity. In a contemporary moment, to make sculpture is to deal with all things, microscopic and monumental, subtle and blunt, real and imagined. And it is an attempt to understanding dealing with 3-dimensionality that can be applied approach to this talk is as a sculptor encountering upon the work. Similar to the ant that crawls through different bodily fragments, I want to run against the clock, to think with time, to manipulate different body parts, to be with different bodies across times and places, and finally asking what is at stake. So here comes to my first point, which is running against the clock, light source, timepiece as an amateur. So the first work I picked is called Sculptures That Eat by Giovanni Alcemo. He's an Italian artist of the arte povera movement. And a lot of the work within of his thinking about this invisible energy within form, within material. And I picked this work particularly because the first time I encountered this work, it's a bit silly, and I was like, what? But I think it's over time, it kind of grows into me. So basically, the way the work functions is that, as you can see, it features a smooth granite block, which is there's a smaller block that is attached by a loose wire. Between them is a lattice. And if this is allowed to dry out, there will be insufficient tension to keep the work together, and the smaller block will drop. So in order for this work to stay, the work needs to be constantly renewed with lattice in order to retain its integrity. And I think this work makes me think a lot about the hierarchies of material, this kind of man-made versus organic nature, and it's very quirky, very playful way of thinking about tension and energy, which I personally love when I see that kind of dynamics in different sculpture. And the next work, I want to introduce you all to one of my favorite artists that really thinking about sculpture, urban planning, architecture, and space. So Gordon Meta Clark with the work called Intersect. And the funny thing is, he studied to be an architect. And in architecture, there is this very intricate relationship between the private and the public space, urban development and decay. And all these things became the medium and the subject matter of his practice. And yet to introduce, he lived in New York at the time where there's a lot of, urban planning and gentrification going on. But this work was made for the Paris Biennale, where he literally carved two walls of a buildings that opposite to, I think, the Centre Pompidou, which was then under construction. And for me, this kind of spatial intervention, this kind of sculpture, I think of it as an act, a gesture of the anti-monument. I think that is really contemplated the poetics of the civic ruin. And as viewers, you can see the skeletons inside of the buildings from either interior or exterior. For me, that really provoked this ephemeral nature of his gesture, thinking about the dynamic of spatial and temporal qualities in the urban settings. And the thing is, the work exists as photographs. And he also did this signature thing where he sliced different photos together, and he coined the term an architecture. And another work I would like to introduce to you all, also by Gordon Clark, is Days and Pier 52. So this is the pier that in New York City there's like a Hudson River. And in his words, that what he did was he carved out, I think 5 or 6 different holes in the roof of a very industrial, ruined pier, like a factory space. And this was before New York really became like a capitalist, like with all these skyscrapers and buildings. And in his words, he talked about this work as he wanted to let the light that would change during days and seasons to become a peaceful enclosure. Also like a renovation of a decaying set reminder of previous industrial era. Speaking of light and the lack of light, I would like to introduce the next work by Michelle Lopez, Smoke Cloud. So Michelle's my mentor, and I think personally this is one of my favorite works of Michelle. So I just want to read the material out. So it's tempered architecture glass, ultraviolet light, tin, silver nitrate, varnish, and walnut wood. And I think what really captured me about this piece is, if you look at the installation settings, you see that it's really explore the themes of appearance and disappearance through like shifting images of material of the silver nitrate, which is a mirroring solution that she poured onto a large-scale architectural glass. And because I know Michelle personally, so I kind of had like an insight into how she made the work, was that she basically what she did, like the pouring process, similar to like a drawing gesture of the body, which she had to do it in like a dark room that really limited the vision. And I think it's become this kind of intuitive making that really resonates with me when I make my work. And here you can see if you look at the materiality of the mirror, of the silver nitrate on the mirror, that kind of appears to the image of the cloud, that it appears and disappears like smoke, and depending on the environment and the viewer's point of view within the space. And for me, this work really questions the status of the object and the possibility of removal. This is after people, there was like cleaning the mirrors, the windows, and it has the same effect. And I was, oh, this is like a Michelle sculpture. And I think I personally loved it when like the works don't only exist and artworks, but I get to catch certain element of what I call a sculptural element in in real life, in my encounters in like a immediate environment. Okay, so next. speaking of, also, maybe we're moving a little bit to the idea of time here. So this is one of my favorite works ever. Since I first encountered, I think it always had this special place when I think about the idea of, like objects in sculptures, and the idea of objects empathy, which I will speak more later what they represent. So this is the work entitled Perfect Lovers by Feliz Gonzalez Torres. So basically what this work is that two clocks, they are set at the same time initially, though they might fall out of sync over the course of the exhibition. If one or both of the clocks stop functioning, the clock is being reinstalled and repaired. Then it will be reinstalled again to then reset to the same time. So the idea is that they will, in theory, they will last forever. And this is the writing of Feliz Gonzalez Torres on this work, which I think there's this idea of, synchronizations and the idea of time, and which for me is something I think a lot. Like how do you, and also like the work itself is just very standard, very banal, very ordinary clock models that you can go to a store like IKEA and find it. But through this kind of like writing, through this kind of context, I think it's acquired like a new symbol, like a new meanings, and which I think is very poetic. And when I lived in New York, I actually bought two clocks and had this this cheap version of this work in my bedroom. And also I like the idea that like the sculpture, the artwork as an idea that you can bring into your intimate space, like your bedroom, like kitchen. That it's when it lives with you, it has when it lives with you, you live with it. It acquires a different life, like a different time. And also, I want to this will transition to my next point about the idea of the body, because when the clock starts to run out, that means the battery starts to die. And thinking about like how we as humans will start to decay. I think like there are certain pieces in the show that you can see, different body part like this decaying or like remnants, fragments of body, which bring me to my next work, also another piece by Feliz Gonzalez Torres. So this is called Untitled Portrait of Grass in LA. So what this work is, what intrigued me about this work and about Felix sculptures in general is that it's so bodily, but it's on appearances is devoid of, like a figure, like an actual human body. So what this work is a pile of, just candies that you can find anywhere. But the weight of the whole pile is 175 pounds. Is this in order to replicate the weight of Ross, which is Feliz's partner at that time, was dying because of the AIDS crisis. And in the gallery settings, you can see that like this. So viewers are, the audience are invited to, take a piece or how many pieces of candies you want with them. You can keep it or you can eat it. And as the visitors take the candies, the configuration of the work change. So this action, the audience action becomes some kind of loss, even though like the work holds the potential to be replenished. And I think it's one of the pieces that also really stays with me over time because there's something very poetic, but also romantic because when you open a candy like a wrapper, when you eat it, there's this idea of consumptions, of indulgence. I think that's part of any. There's the idea of even like sensuality. That I think that's part of any romantic relationships. The next work is Strange Fruit by Zoe Leonard. So this work is, I'm going to show multiple photos of this work. I think I first approached this work when I first approached this work, I thought like before thinking about what the work is, I think it's the title that really intrigues me. Like similar. The title really intrigues me. So the works start as a form of consolation after the death of Zoe Leonard's friend, also because of the AIDS crisis. And I think I'm not sure anymore. So it's, as you can see, there's this orange, bananas, grapefruit, lemons, avocados, but the artist withdrew the inside of the fruit, but it's just the skins of the fruit just lying on the ground. And what she did was she literally like stitch different, stitches different threads together in a very meticulous, in a very caring manner, during the installations, time that because they are like organic matter, so they will decay and wilt, and you can actually smell the smell of the decaying fruit skin. And I think for me is thinking about the decaying organic matters, thinking about ask us to witness decay with patience and care and close attention. Thinking about and I think which is really interesting is when the museums or galleries or institutions choose to display it, it really questions the idea of preservation because, you think about the role of museums and institutions is to preserve the artwork, but here that it has this impermanent quality that brings a lot of the idea of preservation permanence into questions. And I think many of you will know that you can see here on the left, the Zoe's, this work is reference the Vanitas, which is like a Baroque style paintings of still life. You know, there's a study called like Memento Mori that it reminds you that life is very fleeting of death. And I think this work kind of reference that, but she brings the still life into life by not just not just drawing or paintings the fruits, but to displaying, to really work with these decaying porous materials. And if you look at all the details of all the zips, all the closures, all the stitching, it's very meticulous. There is a very labor-intensive process to me, and I think it's kind of imitate the process when we confront with loss. That is the everyday, is that time of like how do we deal with loss. And I kind of pair this work in the same with Felice's work with the candies. And I think which interests me is that, you know, like the idea of like portrait. This is also, you know, this will operate in the same manner as like a portrait of David, like Zoe's friend that died. So, and it makes me think about the idea of, you know, like when it's portrait, not to think of, when you think of a person, like what objects do you associate them with? And maybe this is my, you know, like exercise for you to live with this when you think of your, you know, your close family member, your spouse, your partner, your child. What object would you associate them with? If you could make a portrait of them with objects, what would it be? And what does that object or the qualities of that object material suggest about that portraiture of that person? Okay, so the next one, Doris Salcedo. So Doris Salcedo is the first, I would say, I think Doris Salcedo is the first work I saw when I moved to New York in 2015. Like I saw her retrospective at the Guggenheim, and I think as an artist, she had a big influence on me, like the way I think of objects, the way I use objects within my own work. So in this work is 50 chairs stacked between two city buildings, and it was a commission for the 8th International in Istanbul, Biennale. And in this work, she talked about the idea of the topographies of the words that was so embedded in everyday life, like how the idea of loss, of violence, that are so apparent, are so present in, you know, very domestic objects such as chairs, of tables, of wardrobes, and this is what she did in this work, where to me personally is she created a memorial that just from wooden chairs. And I think it's a very simple gesture, but it's the repetition, is the piling up of objects, of chairs. The furniture here is used to evoke the human body by its very absence, which I think is, as a gesture, is very poignant, very poetic. And through the material qualities, the new form function as very subtle witnesses to imply personal and collective narrative. So this is also another work by her that I personally really loved. So the translation of the title literally means on the surface of the skin. And the story behind this piece is that she wanted to make a shroud as a memorial for a nurse that was being tortured during the war. And if you look at the images here, it's rose petals and thread being stitched very delicately, very meticulously. And in person, it's became like a huge blanket that literally could cover, I would say, like half of this room. And for me, what is so poetic about this work is that it's a monumental memorial, but it's also a dedicated offering. And in the similar thread of the work I showed of shrink food, she used organic material as a medium, and which for me is like how you treat a flower, like a flower petal, which is such a living thing, as a material, and how do you control it? And I also think that the way things are is a repetition of the same material, but it's that labor, it's that intensive labor of that shirt suturing being stitched up together. It's really expressed like this idea of the pain or like the stitching of the skin. So yeah, like a very funny story is that when I think of sculptors or artists I like, I often associate them with either like a material or an object. Like Felice, I would say candies. And Doris Salcedo, if you look at her body of work, she's known for chairs, table, wardrobes. But what I associate with her with is a Nokia flip phone, because I went to a talk at the New Museum, and I don't remember what was it about, but by chance or by fate, I don't know, I just sat right behind her back, and then she took her phone out, and it was like a Nokia flip phone, and it was kind of funny and weird because I haven't seen that phone in such a long time. So it's a random story, but I will always associate Doris Salcedo with like a Nokia flip phone. So the next work, moving along, the body, the idea of body functions. Jazz fan. So Jazz fan, he's I think one of the younger artists in the series that of all the artists I've shown. So if you look at the material list, is resin, glass, melanin, estradiol, the testosterone, silicone, wood. So what Jazz fan is known for is that he created these, I would say, pipe-like amateurs, and or he's trained in glass blowing. So here you can see these weird biomorphic, which I call like a blobs that really wraps around these amateurs. And I think what intrigues me about his work is that it draws on the laboratory process of distillation, extraction, and injection. And as you can see, there's material used that are testosterone, which is hormones, melanin, which is a substance in your skin, and how these substances that carry social, cultural meanings. You can see that he used materials that really approximate the body. For example, like silicone, resin, create these like fleshy pipes. These glass blobs become organs. Like to me, like the way I interpret the work, you see the contrast between the geometric grid and these biomorphic blobs. And you see like the material that is actually infused in the glass blobs are testosterone, like pigments such as like melanin, and those are substances that explore, like the gender, the status, the comfort, that really the biological marks of our bodies. I want to mention that he's trans, so this is, he used the materials that, hormones that being injected in his own body as part of the work. So I see the work as also an extended self-portrait of him. For me, the work is, it's very ephemeral and fluid. And I think I watched an interview of him saying that, when the viewers come, when he had visitors to his studio, he really encouraged the visitors to come and pick up these glass blocks from the amateurs. But because of so people can hold them and like understand them, and because of the materials of made in these, it's become there's this exposure of the interior. But because like in a gallery or in a museum setting, this kind of like picking up or the encouraging of the audience to hold these objects are not very visible. So moving on from the body, this is my last point in response to the talk and the idea of problem solving, of like the why in the work, like why do we make the work we make. So I think of the why in terms of as an artist, like the agency, like why this material, why do you even make? Personally, I think sometimes I make work or other artists to attempt to address a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can have a solution, but I think the work operates as a process of solving. So there's always a space to play with that problem and then articulate that, play into work, into like sculpture. And I think there's what is kind of special about this is that I think that this urgency, this agency to hoping to solve a problem becomes like the impetus to become like an impetus for the practice. So this is one of the work that whenever I think of it, it makes me laugh. So I don't know if you're familiar with Yang, but she's known for these very, for these Venetian flies, very shiny objects. But I think this is one of her earlier works that I think this is my favorite work of hers because of how situational it is, and the work it's like how do you solve a problem. So it's very straightforward, called a storage piece. And I read about this work is I think at that point she was saying that she didn't have enough financial materials to store some artwork, and it's her job that she has to exhibit all over the place, and there's costs coming with like storage, of unpacking, of packing, and even in sculpture that costs really duplicate. So what she did for an exhibition is that she would just display wrapped and stacked artworks onto palette. And for me, it's really like the form is like as a result of a very specific, economic or social situation. So basically, every time I pack my studio or like my apartment, because of my situation, I've been moving a lot, I always thought of that piece. Like this. So this is my studio view when I wrapped and packed all my sculptures. When I to move them into a storage place in Philadelphia. So this is my version of Heyu's Yang storage piece. And I think what is funny about this kind of work is like when you start thinking about it, like the kind of problem solving, okay, how do you wrap, how do you pack, how do you store, it has its own aesthetics. And yeah, I mean, Okay, next, Jessie Reeves. Someone I personally love her work, and me and my friends always refer to her as scrap queens of furniture, because she worked as a person who assisted in upholstery, and her entire practice is that she would collect discarded furniture and make them into these sculptures. But the brilliant thing about this work, like her practice, I think, is the work never divorced from its function. So you can still sit on the chairs. And I think what is so intrigues me about this kind of problem-solving methodology in her practice is she really plays with design, sculpture, highbrow art, lowbrow art, which is tend to stay in their separated corners, but she really just put them all together, and through different actions like methodologies such as carving, cutting, manipulating the furnitures, like how we think of furniture is meant to accommodate our bodies. So the sculptures become, these different living forms of furniture to be used, to be lived with, and to be loved. And I love the How to Remove Stains piece. It's kind of quirky and funny. So what you did, she just took away the cover and just padded all the foam. And what I loved about her practice is that she really used the techniques, the methodologies in upholstery, and really played with it, really turn it into something of her own. So the next work is Gabriel Orozco, Human Stone, and I think he made this work. I read somewhere that he wanted to collect it, like he wanted to create an archive of the New York City street. So what this work is a plasticine wall of his weight in plasticine, and then it was rolled on the street of New York City that got all the imprint of the rolling and the pressure of the weight of the mass. So according to his words is that he thinks sculpture tries to represent the body. So there's this idea of a vulnerable stone, a vulnerable mass that's on the movement that will get imprint from reality that will express very well idea of body in action. I think maybe you can, if you remember, like thinking about the untitled portrait of Ross, where a candy pile, have the same weight as Ross. This plasticine wall has the same weight of the artist that really roll on the street and picks up all this, like dirt remnants. Like when you go out on the street here, sometimes it's really polluted, and then when you come back, it smells bad, and you smell bad. So when I think of this work, I think of like a very bad day in traffic where your body really absorbed all the smoke, from vehicles or just dirt and pollution. Okay, so this brings me to my last work. I think I want to end my presentation with this work here, called Sky Ladder. I think I have loved this work since high school, because not only it looks like very pretty, but it's also the creation of the work is that the artist Kyle Khan, he made this sky ladder, which is like a huge ladder that's rigged with explosive. And as the explosion starts, it's create this, like climbing fireworks to reach the sky. And why he made this work is that it was a gift for his grandma. In his word, that she was the biggest supporter of his art. So he wanted to dedicate it, this gift. He wanted his grandma to see the work when it's like installed successfully. So he had multiple attempts at this work, but it failed because of whatever reason. But on the fourth attempt, it succeeded, but because but his grandma has to watch it like on an iPhone because she was too sick to be present at the place where the work was installed. And the story is that after the work was installed, like a month later, like his grandma passed. So for me, that the work is a very poetic. It's like a parting gift, like a dedication to the artist, grandma, who's in his work, he's the biggest supporter of his art career. And when I want to end the talk with this work because I think often like artists or myself, we tend to think the work has to be something very big, very epic, like very like monumental, not in the scale itself, but in order to have values. But I think throughout the examples that I showed here, the work is always a small gesture. It's a gift. It's a dedication. It's a consolation. It's a memorial either to a collective or like someone that's very dear to you, and I think it brings me to my last point, that like the agency of making, of like why artists make. I think Feliz Torres Gonzalez really appeared a lot in the talk today, and I think this is this quote that from him that always stay with me, that it doesn't it's that very like humanistic, this very like that desire to leave a mark. I will just read the quote. Above all else, it is about leaving a mark that I existed. I was here, I was hungry, I was defeated, I was happy, I was sad, I was in love, I was afraid, I was hopeful. I had an idea and it had a good purpose, and that's why it makes works of art. And I think this really encapsulates how I felt about, when I encounter a work of art, and I'm so convinced that, it exists because of like a reason, or it had to exist. I think it's because of, like when we make is our desire to, to simply just to like leave a mark. I think that I named the talk after J Dilla's last album. I don't know if you had a chance to read my explanation why I named it like the Tender Donut of the Heart is that he made the album. It was his last album. He made it on a potato, which is like a slang term for a very low tech, like crappy device on his hospital bed. But the music that came out of it was so intricate, so like lively, so like full of life, even though it was at the last day of his last breath. And I kind of want to pair like like that album and like this quote together on like the agency, the desire to to leave a mark. Like I was in love, I was hungry, I felt defeated, but like that's why we are like humans, and that's why like we exist. But yeah, thank you so much.
So much, Vy. We can take questions now from the audience if anyone has any. Any questions?
Hello.
I'm turning the music down, so questions, comments.
Can you use Vietnamese or?
Feel free to use.
Yeah, feel free to use
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese.
Don't worry, I can interpret as well.
Ok. Trước tiên cảm ơn Vy tại vì có introduce rất là nhiều nghệ sĩ trong này, thì trong đó cũng có rất nhiều nghệ sĩ triết thích, và có những nghệ sĩ triết mới nghe nhưng mà cũng rất là thú vị. Thì có một cái chi tiết rất là nhỏ mà có lẽ mọi người sẽ dễ bỏ qua khi mà bạn đi nói kể về, nhưng mà Chiết thì lại rất là thích thú với lại cái chi tiết đó. Đó là cái chi tiết về cái hai cái đồng hồ của Felix González-Torres. Thì ở đây mình biết rằng là Felix González-Torres là một nghệ sĩ conceptual art, thì Cuban American artist. Thì cái thú vị ở đây mà Chiết thấy rằng đó là Vy nói rằng là Vy có hai cái đồng hồ ở trong phòng ngủ, như là một cái cheap version của cái đó, và cái đó là cái thú vị. Tại vì ở đây mình cũng đụng tới cái problem, và cũng là cái hay của cái conceptual art, đó là it's conceptual. There's no nó không có cái interpretation, cái sự diễn đạt, cho nó cố gắng né. Ở đây mình cũng thấy rằng là tất cả những cái tác phẩm mà của Felix González-Torres mà Vy nhắc đến thì ông ta cũng đặt tên cho những cái tác phẩm đó theo cái kiểu untitled and then và một cái tên đằng sau đó, như là một cái dạng cố gắng thoát khỏi cái diễn đạt, tức là không muốn cái tên đó nói cái gì hết, nhưng mà đồng thời cũng mượn cái tên đó để nói cái gì đó, which is cái thú vị. Thì ở đây là Chiết thấy rằng là hai cái đồng hồ đó trong cái phòng ngủ của Vy nó không có cheap, ý là theo cái cách mà Chiết hiểu về conceptual art thì là nó tất cả mọi thứ thì có ở đó rồi, một cái idea về cái tác phẩm đó. Nhưng mà maybe rằng là đối với Vy và cái việc Vy học và có cái thực hành ở tại Mỹ cũng là một nơi mà có cái truyền thống conceptual art mạnh mẽ, thì có thể Vy có một cái chiều kích khác mà Chiết không phải là một người nghệ sĩ sculpture có thể thấy được. Thì Vy có thể chia sẻ thêm về cái chiều kích đó hay không?
Sorry, I'll just translate quickly. I think this is how I understand the question. So, yeah, thank you, Vy, for this talk, introducing artists that Chiet, the speaker, has known before or encountered for the first time in this talk. And he also wanted to talk specifically about Felix González-Torres. And when Vy mentioned a small detail that she had displayed the clocks in her room as a cheaper version of his work, but I guess he finds that it's not a cheap thing because conceptual art tries to avoid interpretation, and also in the way that Felix, in the way that González-Torres names the work as well as untitled, so they don't impose any interpretation or meaning on them, but maybe that's also a way to understand them somehow. And so Vy, as a sculptor, with a different perspective and a different, understanding or dimension of sculpture, maybe can you share a little bit more about, the fact that you have the works in your bedroom, right?
Vì sao mà Vy gọi nó là cheap, tức là Vy có thấy gì khác ở cái on-site của chính tác giả đó?
Okay, so why did you call that the clocks that you place in your bedroom a cheaper version of González's work?
Yeah, thì cái này là mình tiếng Việt, tại vì hỏi bằng tiếng Việt, cho nên là thì cái lúc mà Vy cái lần đầu tiên mà Vy thấy cái work này là một trong những cái có thể là do cái setting một cái gallery rất là xa ở Chelsea, thì khi mà mình ra IKEA mình rất là thích cái tác phẩm này, nhưng mà mình chỉ có thể là find some way để mình replicate hay cái gì thì mình hay gọi là phiên bản lậu, thì đó thì có thể là maybe cheap rồi, nó không phải là đúng lắm, nhưng mà Vy hay gọi là phiên bản lậu. Và một câu chuyện khá là thú vị thì chắc là sẽ chia sẻ với mọi người đây. Thì có một khán giả là chị Thảo Nguyên, là người lần đầu tiên em gặp chị ở New York bao nhiêu lần trước là mình đã đi xem cái triển lãm này cùng nhau, và hình như mình cũng có nói về hai cái đồng hồ và cái đó thành một cái kỷ niệm, và hôm nay có mặt chị ở đây thì không với mình thì nó khá là delightful. thì chắc là cheap thì không đúng lắm, nhưng mà chắc là phiên bản lậu. Thì giống như mình cứ nghĩ là hồi xưa thì mình đi học mình cứ nghĩ là những cái tác phẩm nghệ thuật thì nó chỉ nằm những cái chỗ sang trọng nhất, phải là vô bảo tàng, phải vô đó. Nhưng mà ok, bây giờ mình có thể suy nghĩ ra đây có thể là problem solving của mình, là mình có thể ra IKEA mình mua 2 cái đồng hồ, mình về mình làm một cái để mình được có một cái phiên bản đó của mình.
So when I was a student, I first encountered the work in a very fancy gallery, and so maybe calling it cheap is not correct, but anyway, I went to IKEA and picked up 2 cheap clocks and put it in my bedroom, so maybe calling it a bootlegged version is more appropriate. I'd also like to share as well that in the audience today there's Thảo Nguyên, the artist who I met while I was in New York, and we also went to see the show and talked about this work. But obviously as a student you encounter works in museums or galleries, very clean, pristine places. And so, you know, it was my own way of problem solving, like I can't buy this work, I can't collect this work, but how do I, you know, but I still want to see and I guess bring the work into my home, and that's how I bootlegged Gonzalez Royce's work. Any other questions? Do you have a question, Bill?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Hello, Vy. Thank you for the really informative talk. I really enjoyed it. I think for me, throughout the talk, there've been a few keywords that I'm really glad that I get to take away with. And I think it's the playfulness and the transient nature of what sculpture could be. That for me is like it's a very long-lasting kind of mark or like an impression in all the examples that you shared with us today. I guess one of the things that really connected the content of this presentation with the exhibition that we're sitting in right now is exactly that there's a possibility to kind of elevate the works from heavy context, from historical context, and remind us that artworks are a lot of the time very personal, or it comes from a personal place. I think one of my questions for you would be, a lot of these examples are very kind of Western art world eccentric, right? You've been back here to Vietnam for a couple of months now, and in our talk, in our conversation and exchange, I understand that you're also on the journey to learn about Vietnamese sculpture, or what it means to be practicing sculpture in Vietnam. And in public spaces today, throughout the city or throughout a lot of cities in the country, we see a lot of monumental sculptures that are very much kind of driven by a particular ideology, which is socialist realism. How do you think something like that would influence or inspire or contradict with the way that you work? And how do you think something like that, which is such a reality that we live in here in Vietnam, is translated in the works in this exhibition? So 2 questions.
Okay, so the first question about, thank you, Andrew, for asking me. I think it's the idea of the monumentality of sculpture is something I think about a lot. But for me, I think about the opposite of the kind of work that interested me is the kind of work that I call is unmonumental. And I think in this slides that I pick works that, you know, even with the, you know, Doris Salcedo, like tall, monumental, like memorial, but it's still made of, you know, very mundane, ordinary chairs. And I think I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, but I think what made me decide to come back here for a year to be a practicing artist is that to tune in with because I always prefer to my practice, like the way I made, is that I have this a very, I call it a very Vietnamese makeshift things. But I think the point of me coming back is to really tune in with it, like what it really is for me. And I can tell you that so far I see it everywhere on the streets. For me the kind of Vietnamese sculptures that interest me the most is that, how when you ride on the street, you see mopeds, they packed with, huge chairs, huge, weird thing like a mattress, like a refrigerator, or like a whole garden of like orchids. Or you go on the sidewalk and you see a table that you see a table that being used as like a leg raiser, and then half an hour later you see like a kid sleeping on the table or something like that. And I think it's the way that like how do objects, they adopt different lives, how do they mutate throughout different spaces, and how each of like the people that very ordinary people, how do ordinary people make use of different ordinary objects. And sorry, what's the second question? I don't remember. How is it has something to do with the exhibition? Yeah. Right. And I think that I think what really captured me about different works in the exhibitions is that also the kind of materials that came into the work are either archival or not lost and found, but found upon the journey. For example, I'm specifically talking about Richard's work. But it's funny because I literally met him the first time this weekend, and I asked him, where did you find these pieces? And also, pairing with or like dot tags, or like very mundane, the mundane, the ordinary objects that through the way of assemble, the way of being, bringing into like a different context, like what kind of social, historical, meanings that being acquired when it is an artwork. So yeah, I guess that my answer.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Hi Vy, thank you for the talk, that was very great. So earlier in your talk you mentioned that you left us with an exercise to associate the people around us with an object. So I'm just curious to see what object you associate Vietnam with.
Yeah, this is a very easy answer for me. Honda moped. Motorbikes. Yeah.
Sorry, just some context is that in these artworks she works a lot with the shells of Honda motorbikes and the parts as well. Any other questions? I also have a question for you. Specifically about Skyladder. So in my master's I actually wrote about Skyladder, but when I wrote about it, it was very much about scale and the monumental scale of the work, and also relating that to the sublime. So the vertigo that because you talk a lot about his grandma and how he tried to make this work basically for her, and in the end it was very sad that she could only watch through an iPhone and she couldn't be there. But I guess relating this to your work, you are so sensitive to materials and you look at them with so much care, you see the sculpture and everything, but is there sentimentality in that as well? Or is that something that I missed, like in the first time that I missed with my letter as well?
It is in my work. Yeah, it's funny because I think in my own work I tend to avoid that, sentimentality first, because I just love material in general, like the way, I like to touch things, like to look at things. But maybe like, I don't know if I can answer these questions like, right now, but I think which is really interesting, like now I finished the talk that, I start with, okay, I'm going to pick out 3 themes, I'm going to, 5 examples, talking about like the formal, the conceptual, the materials. But I think towards the end that I tend to pick work that, are very personal, and chose to even like gloss over like the scale of the ladder. I think maybe because like me deciding to bring that quote, Phyllis at the end, kind of brought me back to, because I think my last point I want to talk about like problem solving, like the agency of problem solving, like what is there? If you stripped everything, if you stripped out the scale, if you stripped out the material, if you stripped out all that, like context that we tend to put on the work or tend to impose on the work, like what is left? What is that last mark of the work?
Any more? Okay. Unless you have anything more to add, I would really like to thank Vy for coming here today, and thank you all for coming as well to this talk. You can catch her doing many projects in the upcoming year, soon to be announced. But thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. Cảm ơn mọi người.